So today I want to answer the question of when do you book your hypnosis client in for the second session, third, fourth, fifth, even sixth session if they need it? Well, I can answer this very, very easily. Before you go ahead, you get to the end of your session with your client, and before you go ahead and say, okay, today is Monday, let's give it 7 days and I'll see you the following Monday, then the Monday after that. And in between that time, you want to listen to my audio that I give you in the homework. Before you go ahead and do that and tell your clients this, I want you to understand what happens, well, what really happens at the end of a good hypnosis session. There is something called processing. There's not a lot of gurus that talk about this. You'll often hear people skip this part and they usually substitute their lack of understanding of what processing is, which I'll explain in a moment, with things like giving away the audios and saying, okay, you've got to listen to this audio twice a day for the next 30 days to get the most impact from the session. Here's the funny thing, or the really cool and interesting thing about processing. The way that we look at it in conversational hypnosis is processing is really the start of the therapy. Your job when using conversational hypnosis, the way that we teach, and even other therapeutic ways of doing things as well, I look at it as the session is basically opening the doors to allow processing to begin. Processing essentially is the unconscious mind finding new, and let's underline that word, new things for this client to feel, think, understand, and create insight, or what we call aha moments. So what happens at the end of the session is, if you do it the right way, you're essentially opening the doors for this client and saying to the client, or saying to the client's unconscious mind, now it's your time to do the therapy. I've cleaned up all the thinking with you. We've got rid of all the knots. It's now time for you to reconnect to new ideas, new insights, and new things to allow this client to overcome the problem and thus the symptom as well. And processing is ridiculously powerful. But the one thing where most therapists and coaches stuff it up is they interrupt this processing. They interrupt the processing with the unconscious mind, and all its knowledge and all its wisdom and creativity will go ahead and start doing the actual therapy. That's right. Even when the client's not sitting in front of you, the therapy actually begins when they do the processing. That's when they go home, they have a sleep, they spend a couple of days sort of recycling old thoughts and going through new ideas and stuff. It's sort of like a bit of an emotional roller coaster for your client. It's the therapist or client can interrupt this processing by telling a client to listen to an audio. Think about what an audio is doing in those very basic needs. It's an audio that basically you've created full of symptoms. And this whole idea of repetition is absolute rubbish. The unconscious mind can learn very, very quickly. It can change things very, very quickly. But a lot of therapists and a lot of coaches, and I often fell into this at the very start of my career as well, is we interrupt this because we think we know more. We think that a client needs this, or we think a client needs that, because that's based on our opinion and the way that we see things for our clients' lives. We don't want to do this. You've got to realize that a client's unconscious mind is way more knowledgeable than you. It's way more powerful than any audio or any homework that you could create. And as a matter of fact, if you don't let the unconscious mind process and basically leave it alone to do what it's supposed to do, and you keep interrupting with audios and homework, eventually the unconscious mind can turn around and say, well, you're not leaving me to do my job that I'm supposed to do. I'm just going to stop and let's just play your audio. And there's no way in the world that an audio or doing some sort of homework is going to have the impact of processing. So what I recommend, coming back to the original idea, when do you give your client a second session, third or fourth? You have to wait for the processing. We've had it on numerous occasions where our ACH or advanced conversation hypnosis students will say, I let my client go home. The session, in my mind went okay. They're a little bit worried about the result. And they say, Scott, what should I have done differently? Should I have added anything? And I always say, wait for the processing to stop. Now, as your client goes through processing, it's sort of like, I explain it like this. It's like the unconscious mind trying on a new suit. It'll try on a jacket. It'll try on the pants. It'll try on the shoes. Then the shoes won't match the jacket, so it changes the jacket. Then the jacket won't match the pants, so it's got to change the pants and the shoes. It's got to put on a vest. It's got to put on a hat. Over and over, the unconscious mind will try on these different suits until it finds the suit that looks the best. That's just a metaphor. So your client will go through a lot of emotions. They're going to have good days, bad days. The emotion's going to go up. They're going to feel hungry. They're going to have insomnia. All these different emotions and insights and new things are going to happen in their life. But this is all part of processing. If you don't allow this thing to happen and you keep interrupting it, eventually the unconscious mind will give up. There is no audio, no matter how good it is, how good the binaural beats are, no matter how good the symptom suggestions are, it's never going to have the impact of what the unconscious mind knows what to do, because the client's unconscious mind knows that person. It is that person. It's overcome so many things throughout this person's life without having to listen to an audio, without having to do homework. And this is what processing is. A really short version of processing is like if you have a really, really bad day, you're really emotional, you're just pissed off and frustrated, you go to bed, you wake up the next day and you look back on that day and think, okay, it wasn't that bad. That's processing. You've had things in your life that you've overcome, that you've woken up the next day and no longer had that problem, that addiction, that craving, whatever it is, you've no longer had that. So this whole idea of repetition is just a myth. It's just gurus and stuff guessing what should happen. And using audios and homework on top of good therapy, you will now interrupt the most important part, which is processing. So before you give your client a date for their second, third, or fourth session, you have to wait for the processing to finish. You'll know the processing is finished because either your client will have the result or they'll go back to, I sort of call it like being normal again. There's no emotions, there's no insomnia, there's no weird cravings or anything like that. A client basically goes back to normal, if we can use that metaphor. And it's at that point, if your client contacts you back, that's when you want to start thinking of a second and third session. I highly recommend stopping the audio, stopping the homework, because all you'll do is interrupt processing that is way more powerful than any suggestion or binaural beat. And it goes way beyond any of this idea of like repetition. A client has to listen to the suggestions 100 times, I don't know, to get to the result. And you can try this for yourself. If you're writing the scripts and stuff like that, which I don't recommend either, because you can't script this stuff, how can you foresee what a client needs or what their desires are, what their root cause is? You can't write this stuff down. But get a client into trance or have them relax and tell them if they're a smoker or they have anxiety. Let's use anxiety because you're smoking all the time. And tell that client they no longer have anxiety. Say it 5,000 times in a session. Have the session go for 5 hours straight. Have a client come out, and I guarantee that anxiety will still be there. Not because you haven't got to the root cause. There's all other little parts to that. But it doesn't matter how many times you repeat the wrong thing. The wrong thing is the wrong thing. The best thing you can do, and the way that we look at therapy, is the client comes in, you get rid of all their knots, you untie their thinking, you basically get rid of their old ideas, their old problems, their old reasons behind that problem, just what a therapist will do. Then you send a client home to process. And a processing can take an hour, it can take 5 hours, it can take a day, it can take a whole week. But your client will go through that time trying on different suits. Eventually that client will find the right suit that suits them, for lack of better words. The client's unconscious mind will find the right resource for them. It'll find the right insight, the right aha moment for them. It's not what you want for your client. Telling your client what you want them to think is absolute garbage, because now you're telling them what to think and what to do and what to feel based on what you think is best for a client. And therapy doesn't work like that. But again, try that little experiment. Tell somebody they're a non-smoker 5,000 times. Have them come out the other end, and I guarantee they'll still be a smoker. Doesn't matter how many times you repeat the wrong thing. The wrong things are wrong things. So all in all, guys, don't book that client in for the second, third, or fourth session. Just tell a client, explain to them processing. A lot of people should be taught how to do that. We teach that in an ACH program. But you have to explain to clients what will happen from now until the processing ends, and what processing is, what they'll experience, what they'll feel. And this gives them a bit of a heads up about what's going to happen. But processing by far, guys, is the most important part of therapy. Your client does not have a breakthrough in front of you. Your client has a breakthrough after the processing has stopped. So don't interrupt it with audios and homework. I wouldn't recommend ever using those things again, because you're interrupting the most important part of therapy.